Hello and welcome to Swiping Through History. Today is a very special day because I have Mike Ingram here with me, ready to talk about probably my favorite historical figure, the one, the only King Richard III. Now, it was the anniversary of his death last week for the Battle of Bosworth Field that happened in 1485. And well, I thought it would be nice for the channel to release a little teaser for the main documentary that will be coming next year. And it had such a great response that I thought, why not discuss it in a little bit more detail? Why not use this opportunity to remember the King Richard and just kind of explore a little bit more about him, find out more. So, hello, Mike. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon.
What is it about King Richard III that separates him and makes him stand out from other medieval monarchs of the time? Why is it he has such a big following now, over 500 years after his death? What is it that has allowed him to capture the imaginations of so many people?
He's a hugely important king. He's the last Plantagenet king of England. I mean, all the Plantagenet kings and the kings that followed as well were all important. But Richard's particularly important because he is the last Plantagenet king. And that, of course, goes right back to the 1100s. So he comes down the line from it. He probably wasn't meant to be a king whatsoever, because he is the youngest of four children, or four boys. The others, of course, either die in battle or as part of it, they die unexpectedly young, as in Edward IV. So he stands out for those reasons alone. And then on top of that, you've got all the issues about the actual king himself. I mean, he wasn't on the throne for very long, but while he was on the throne, he did make some quite important changes to how things were done. But also as well, I think one of the things with it as well, that he's been so badly maligned by Shakespeare, if nothing else. I think that then makes it more important to redress, for example, the Richard III Society just want the truth out there, whatever it is, good or bad. But he is mixed in such a huge cloud of misinformation, invented stories,
Mystery as well.
Yeah, and Tudor propaganda at the time hasn't helped it either. So
I think
really,
that's, for me, that's something that has captured my imagination. I'm absolutely fascinated by King Richard, and I think it is the mystery that kind of surrounds him, or that did surround him, because obviously it was very recent when they discovered his body, actually buried underneath a modern day car park, and I think because of those kind of questions that are being answered consistently about him and these new discoveries coming to light, it just really brings him to life and to the fore. I think, we don't know everything about him yet, and there's still more to find. And I think for me, especially, like that connection with finding the truth about a human being who lived 535 years ago, and it is quite special, and I think is exciting.
Well, it is a detective story, and it's one that we haven't got to the end of yet. Finding new things all the time, new research. I mean, obviously, the big story is the princes of the Tower. Did he murder them or not? That again, we don't know the answer.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to ask this, so I might as well get it in anyway.
It's coming.
I know it's coming. I genuinely don't think that he did murder the princes in the Tower. My personal belief, and this comes over spending years and years and years of doing research, I think it's much more likely that probably the elder brother actually died of an illness. That there are hints, but then the younger brother comes back as Henry Tudor calls him, Perkin Warbeck, but he insists that he is Richard, the Duke of York, and the young prince.
I've always had the suspicion around the princes in the tower, mainly because I believe that the argument is taken out of context sometimes when we just assume that they were murdered. There is no evidence to suggest they were murdered. The only evidence we have is rumor and speculation that comes from around the time. But if you base an entire argument on a rumor, if that rumor is not true, you suddenly have a problem, because the whole premise of the argument is on a shaky foundation. So that's always been my problem with the debate. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about effectively another argument that is basically based on those rumors not being true. You know, if you take the rumors as being true, then okay, the question might be who murdered them? Was it Richard? He was maybe potentially more likely to have been able to, with, you know, the access he had to them, you know, and maybe his motive was greater than someone else. But if we actually say that rumor was just a rumor, suddenly it just opens up a whole other can of worms. That is so interesting.
Well, let's look at two fairly simple arguments. The first one is the finding of the bodies. So they find those under a staircase. Now, to actually do that, somebody would have had to have murdered them, then dug up the staircase, dug a hole in the ground several feet deep, then completely rebuilt the staircase in one night, when there was at least 900 people living in there at the time.
The Tower of London, that is.
That already puts it on dodgy ground. Yes, yeah, the Tower of London. And then add to that as well, there have been numerous Roman remains found around the site over the years, buried quite deep. So I personally think that those bones that were found are actually Roman and nothing to do with the princes, and a complete red herring. So that's argument one. Then the second argument to go with it is this person, Richard, who is called Perkin Warbeck later on. Now, if you're a pretender for the throne, have a go at the throne once, have a go at the throne twice if you really want to push your luck. Perkin Warbeck, as he's now called, actually comes back 5 times.
Yeah.
Now, he's either got to be who he says he is, and everybody else in Europe thinks he's genuine too. So it's not just internally within England. The whole of Europe and Scotland thinks he's real.
Didn't the Holy Roman Emperor at the time actually proclaim him King Richard IV? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so it was generally all around Europe that he was thought to be genuine. So why do you do it 5 times? No, he's constantly trying to invade and get into England. And again, unless he's a complete lunatic, you don't do that unless you're really the person you say you are. Mm. So I think that sort of, in a nutshell, is a couple of what I think quite convincing arguments. There are more, but they're the 2 most obvious ones. And then on top of that, even the Shakespeare story, there is a theory that it wasn't actually written about Richard III at all, and it was written about Cecil in the Elizabethan times. But of course, he couldn't openly accuse Cecil of all the things that he did. So it's possibly a cautionary tale type of thing against the power of Cecil.
But it's an example of the power of Shakespeare as well. I mean, it's like, you know, I now always associate Henry V with the line, once more into the breach, dear friends, once more, which of course he never spoke. He never said those words. But Shakespeare is so powerful that you believe it. You begin to associate these things that, you know, come up in the plays with the actual historical figures.
Yes, yeah. So there's a lot more Richard did good. He changed things. He was very open to new ideas that were going on. But of course, at the same time, he's then got the problem with the French. And this is something I explore in my book in a lot more detail. But he's really against, or that there's a coalition building against the French. So I think a lot of the rumours and the negative stories is actually coming from the French.
Yeah, keep talking.
While we're doing that, to try and make things different. And
I just thought I'd get your book here to show everybody. Richard III and the Battle of Bosworth, written by Mike. All I can say is it's a very good book, very interesting, a lot of very new kind of concepts being explored, which you're talking about as we speak. So don't let me interrupt you.
So we have the issue with the there's a coalition building up against the French. There is also a civil war going on in France at the same time, called the Mad War. It's very, very similar to what was going on in England with the princes in the Tower. And what you have is a new French king. He's a boy. His elder sister takes control of him, and his uncle, the Duke of Orleans, wants control of him as well. So you've got a Richard type character in the Duke of Orleans, and then you've got the Woodvilles in his sister and her family. So very much repeated, and this is where we start to really see this story of the Princes of the Tower. This is why I wanted to labour on it first, because the two are very much connected.
Yeah, it feels like this is where rumours start to circulate and also have political effect at the time.
Yes, and Richard was well known for wanting to invade France. He didn't like what his brother did in 1475 when he invaded France, but was given large sums of money by the French to go back home. And we know Richard was very much against that. So, and I think as well, actually, probably most of England was against that. They thought it was shameful. So it gave them the opportunity, or Richard was waiting for the right opportunity to invade France again. Obviously, which the French didn't want. So that's when they start to put all this political pressure onto Richard. And eventually, because to start with, they don't actually support Henry Tudor. Even though he's in France, they pay deference to him, but it's very much, as one of the commentators writes at the time, it was done more to annoy Richard than actually for real support for Henry Tudor.
Well, Henry Tudor never actually had a claim to the throne, did he?
He does, but it's very distant. It's very mild, and in fact, he was probably closer to the French throne.
Isn't it through an illegitimate line, though?
Yes, yeah. So
one could argue he doesn't have a claim to the throne.
No, you could.
Sorry, that's not my bias coming through, I promise.
No. So this is building up against the French, and so what the French then do is, because Britain is involved in all of this, they take the threat away from Brittany, and then they start supporting Henry Tudor for his landing. They also arrest the Duke of Orleans, so he's no longer a threat. And the only threat they're then left with, which is the biggest one probably, is Burgundy. So this makes it a big European story and not just an English one.
So that brings us back to, in a way, to the Battle of Bosworth Field, because one of the things that you talk a lot about in your book that it hasn't been discussed as much in the past is this concept of this idea of how important the French soldiers, how important they were in the Battle of Bosworth Field, because of effectively almost being a French army. Henry Tudor's army being, having a large contingent of French at Bosworth, which is where Richard is killed and battle goes disastrously wrong for him. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about that as well.
Okay, so the French give Henry, before he leaves, round about 2,000 French soldiers. They're professional soldiers. They're not the same way as it is in England, where they're local militias. They are actually professional, highly trained troops, and they'd spent months training in years beforehand in Pont d'Arche in Normandy. under Swiss instructors on how to fight, and their main weapon was these pikes, very much like you see in the Civil War pikes, but quite a bit longer. A Civil War pike's about 16 foot. These pikes were about 22 foot.
Wow.
And really, there was not a lot you could do to counter them. It's not like the Scottish Chilterns, being primarily defensive formation. These were aggressive attacking formation.
And these French professional soldiers, they were set up to defend against the English invasions.
Exactly, or Burgundy, or Brittany, or wherever. So they were a rapid reaction force that were trained to go to wherever they were needed, to defend the borders of France, basically.
So you ended up with professional French soldiers on the side of Henry Tudor against effectively local militia on the side of Richard.
Yes, yeah, and of course there hadn't been any fighting really for quite some time in England. So they were not. There were a few who were military skilled. Quite a few of them had gone over to learn the trade of fighting in Burgundy against the French, and against the Swiss. So that they'd learnt that beforehand, but there wasn't many. So most people were untrained. They hadn't seen the heat of battle and all the things that go with it. The French don't. Henry Tudor's army under Oxford, his battle line engages the Richard's troops, which is the Norfolk's troops, and the French do a surprise attack on the flank. It's quite clear from European sources that this is what happens, but in the English sources and the Welsh sources, they pretty much write out the French from the story.
And the Tudor propaganda begins.
Yeah. So there's hints at it, but if you read the European sources, the French attack the flank, and imagine them attacking the flank with these 22-foot long spears. You cannot get close to them.
Yeah.
You know, and they hit the flank, and they just roll up Norfolk's line from the side, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Comines writes that Northumberland and his men should have attacked the French, but did nothing but flee.
And I suppose this brings us to the last point, really, which is obviously Richard doesn't. He doesn't decide to live to fight another day. He doesn't see it very clearly is going badly for him, and instead he leads a cavalry charge at his mortal enemy. He sees Henry VII on the field. He sees him moving across the battle to potentially to go and join Stanley's army on the other side, and he makes a break for it. He goes for it. He rolls the dice, and he gets very, very close to Henry within a sword's width. He cuts down Henry's standard bearer, who would have been 2 meters away, would have been next to
even close. Yeah, they'd have been side to thigh, basically.
Side to side. So the fact that he cuts down Henry's standard bearer, we know how close Henry Tudor and Richard III, in the heat of battle, 2 kings of England, actually got to each other. It's a fairy tale story, really. I mean, you don't really have it in any other situation where king fights king, and obviously Richard doesn't quite get there because Henry's bodyguards, get in the way and they usher him to safety. And
well, you've got the Stanleys coming down off the high ground, who are behind Henry, and again Richard had got seconds to defeat him, and in a split second, if it had been second quicker, he could have probably killed Henry, and it would have been all over. But it didn't. The dice landed.
comes down to those seconds. I mean, we have the next 500 years since then were, you know, shaped massively by that battle, in the sense that we wouldn't, if he'd have won, we would not have had the Tudors for a start, which obviously went all the way through. And then we had Elizabeth I because of it, as well as Henry VIII. You know, we had all these incredible, you know, well, these monarchs that, you know, are incredible stories in themselves. But that would not have happened if those few seconds had panned out differently. I mean, it's so, I think it's why it's such an incredible story. I think it's why it comes back to our first thing. It's why
if you're out and you see a feather, pick it up, hold it up shoulder height, and let it fall to the ground. And as it falls to the ground, that's the time frame that the history of England was decided.
Wow. I'd never thought of it like that.
It's that sort of moment. And of course we get Henry.
Yeah, and I think that is the perfect place to end, actually. I think that actually, in that one metaphor, I think you've summed it up beautifully. And so, yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for chatting to us again. And I will give, you know, everybody, have a little look at this book. You know, if you can, you know, get it, have a read of it. It is fantastic. It talks about all of these things we've just mentioned in more detail. Mike is a brilliant writer. I've read it myself many times. And I think we'll end it there on that note. Go outside, find a feather, drop it, and think of that. History was made in that time frame.
Brilliant. Thank you very much again.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.